I have a story to tell you, but I'm begging you don't listen. Please, for your own sake, turn away now. I know how absurd that sounds. You'll think it's some kind of twisted joke. But by the time you understand why I'm warning you, it'll already be too late. I doubt this plea will stop you. Curiosity has a way of overpowering common sense. Still, I need to say this for my own conscience. If I don't, I might not be able to finish this. And I have to finish this. It all starts with Joe. My old friend Joe. I've known him since grade school, over half my life. We've shared too many memories, too many secrets for me to say this lightly. I knew him. Which is why what happened that night couldn't have come from him. It couldn't. Something else made him do it. It was Friday, January 23rd. I was driving to Joe's apartment to pick him and his roommates up. We had plans to hit a few bars, shake off the work week, and maybe laugh until we forgot the monotony of our lives. But when I pulled into his complex, I saw flashing lights, red and blue, flickering against the dark. Police cars, ambulances, a crowd. I parked, my stomach sinking. As I walked closer, I saw it. A body sprawled in the street, wrapped in a sheet. Blood pooled beneath the glint of shattered glass. A dented car sat a few feet away, its front crumpled like a discarded soda can. I froze, horrified. A hit and run, I thought. An accident. But as I climbed the stairs to Joe's apartment on the 3rd floor, it became clear that this was no accident. The police were there too, taping off the entrance to his unit. Officers questioned residents, their faces grim and tight-lipped. The air felt heavy, suffocating. My chest tightened. Joe's apartment? Why his? Panicked, I flagged down an officer. I told him I was supposed to meet Joe and his roommates. I asked pleaded to know if they were okay. His response shattered me. Joe had butchered his roommate with a kitchen knife. Then, he threw himself through the plate glass sliding door. He fell 3 stories to the pavement below. I was frozen numb. The officer's words blurred into a muffled drone. My knees buckled as I stumbled back to my car, questions rattling in my skull. Why? How? Joe wasn't capable of something like this. He couldn't, but he did. I drove home in silence, my body moving as if controlled by strings. My wife met me at the door, her expression shifting to concern the moment she saw me. "What happened?" she asked. I told her haltingly, the words feeling wrong in my mouth. She didn't understand, not the way I did. How could she? Joe was my friend. I told her I needed to be alone and locked myself in our room. Alone, the weight of it all pressed down on me. But there was something else to a nagging need to know. I don't know why I thought to check his email. Maybe I hoped to find some explanation, some fragment of sense in the chaos. I knew his usual passwords, so it wasn't hard. His inbox was unremarkable at first: work emails, bills, the usual clutter. Then I saw it, the last email he'd opened. No subject line, no sender name, just an attachment. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the mouse. I should have stopped there. But I didn't. The file was an image, titled only by a random string of numbers. It loaded slowly, as if reluctant to show itself. It was a man. At first he seemed ordinary, average, unremarkable. But the longer I stared, the more my unease grew. His grin was wrong. Too wide, too sharp. His eyes, they weren't human. They looked vacant, yet somehow focused on me. The longer I stared, the more his grin seemed to stretch, almost imperceptibly. It was like he could see me through the screen. I should have looked away, but I couldn't. The longer I stared at the face, the harder it became to pull away. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours as my eyes locked onto his. Those eyes burned into me, alive with an unnatural intensity that mirrored my own fixation. His grin stretched impossibly wide, as if mocking my fear, daring me to look away. Finally, I wrenched my gaze from the screen. gasping for air like I'd been drowning. That's when I noticed it. The email contained one other thing, one word. A word so wrong, so vile, that even thinking about it made my skin crawl. I can't bring myself to repeat it, not yet. Not until you understand. I couldn't bear to look at the image any longer. The man's grinning face lingered in my mind, even after I slammed the laptop shut. His gaze. It followed me, burned into the back of my eyelids every time I blinked. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. Before closing the laptop, I noticed the timestamp on the email, January 23rd, 5:35 p.m. We were supposed to meet at 6. Joe must have opened that email less than half an hour before everything happened. In the days that followed, I tried to forget. I really did. I went through the motions, attended Joe's funeral, offered hollow condolences to people who didn't know the truth. I tried to tell myself it wasn't my burden to carry. But at night, when the world went quiet, the unease would creep back in. The nightmares started almost immediately. At first, they were disjointed fragments, flashes of violence, blood, and that man's horrific grin. But soon, they grew vivid, detailed. I could feel his presence in my dreams, as though he'd stepped out of that email and into my mind. I'd wake drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, my throat raw from screaming. I was unraveling. I couldn't focus at work. I jumped at shadows, at the slightest noise. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone or something was watching me. I needed answers. I needed to know ... I started researching obsessively, poring over anything that might explain what I'd seen. My searches led me to obscure forums, conspiracy sites, and dark corners of the internet I'd never dared visit before. That's when I found it. Buried in a thread about cursed images was a reference to something called the Grinning Man. A few years ago, the image had circulated on image boards and forums. It was dismissed by most as harmless, just another creepy picture to pass around. But there were whispers, stories buried in comment sections, about people who'd seen it and changed. The reports were chillingly familiar: nightmares, hallucinations, unexplained irritability, and in some cases madness, violent psychosis, murder. The key, according to the thread, was the word, the one attached to the image. It wasn't just a picture, it was a trigger. A catalyst that unlocked something dark, something that shouldn't exist in this world. It sounded ridiculous. Pixels and text causing this kind of chaos? I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as paranoid nonsense. But deep down, I couldn't. Not after what I'd seen. Not after what had happened to Joe. And then, the question hit me like a sledgehammer. Was this going to happen to me too? The panic set in, clawing at my chest. Would I lose control? Would I hurt my wife? Would I end up like Joe? I clung to reason, trying to talk myself down. Hallucinations and paranoia couldn't hurt me, not if I refused to believe in them. I resolved to rationalize it away, to push it out of my mind. But reason meant nothing when night came. The dreams got worse. More vivid, more real. I could feel his cold, grinning presence looming over me. Every detail burned into my memory. The blood, the screams, the terrible grin. Then I started sleepwalking. The first time, I woke up curled in the bathtub, shivering. A few nights later, I found myself in the kitchen, standing over the sink, a knife in my hand. And then, 3 days after that, I woke to the metallic tang of blood in the air. I was standing in the backyard. The knife was in my hand again, dripping red. At my feet lay the mangled remains of a black Labrador, its lifeless eyes staring up at me, accusing me. I dropped the knife, my hands shaking uncontrollably. This was no nightmare. This was real, and I couldn't escape it. I can't piece together what happened next. It's a blank void, an absence so vast it feels intentional, like something took the memory from me. All I know is the aftermath. The dog's bloodied body, my trembling hands, and the sickening act of cleaning it up. I stuffed him into a trash bag, hiding the evidence and stammering to my wife that he ran off in the night. She didn't believe me, how could she? But she didn't press, though her worried glances lingered like accusations. I was unraveling. I tried everything to stop myself, pills, anything that dulled my thoughts, that promised sleep without dreams. I locked up every knife, every sharp edge in the house. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. He wouldn't let it matter. My wife knew something was wrong, terribly wrong, but I couldn't tell her. How do you explain that you're losing control? That something is pulling strings you can't even see? That every second you're awake is a battle against slipping completely into his grasp? The dreams were the worst. They weren't just visions. They were memories of things that hadn't yet happened, soaked in blood and madness. In those dreams, I wasn't just watching the Grinning Man's horrors. I was the one causing them. I felt every act of violence like it was my own hands at work. My friends, my family, strangers I'd never met, they all fell before me. I could hear their screams, feel their blood on my skin, and each time, the Grinning Man stood in the shadows watching. His smile grew wider with every death. He was taunting me, breaking me. Every nightmare brought me closer to the edge. Every waking moment was heavier, darker. I saw shadows where there were none, flinched at the slightest sound, and felt his gaze everywhere I went. I realized the truth. He wasn't showing me what he wanted me to do. He was showing me what I would do. I was becoming him. I don't know what else to do, so I'm writing this. I'm desperate, terrified. I love my wife more than anything, and the thought of hurting her, the one person who has stayed by my side through all of this, rips me apart inside. But he knows that. He's watching, grinning, waiting for the moment when I finally break. I can feel it creeping closer. That's why I'm telling you this. Maybe, just maybe, if you listen, if you take this curse from me, he'll leave me alone. Maybe he'll have you instead, and I can finally find peace. I know it's selfish. I know it's wrong. But I don't see another way. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And if you've made it this far, if you've heard my story, it's already too late. Don't look for him. Don't try to understand. And whatever you do, don't smile.